Very good. Okay, everybody, we'll get started. First of all, anybody notice anything different about the end of the Torah reading this past Shabbat? Anybody in shul this last Shabbat? We finished the book of Leviticus, Sefer Vayikra. All right, so we're this Shabbat we start Sefer Bamidbar. So it takes its name in English, the book of Numbers, because there's a census at the very beginning of it. There are a number of times that the census is taken. The rabbis tried to define rationale for them. So basically, they say whenever some kind of important event happened, that's called for a new census. And Sefer Bamidbar in Hebrew come the opening words of Bamidbar in the wilderness of Sinai. And so as I said, it has a census of the Jewish people. Bamidbar has, in the total of the book, a couple of very important elements. So I'm going to touch upon those tonight just to give you a quick review. Amongst them is the account of why Israel wanders in the wilderness for 40 years, which is actually 38 years because it takes place in the second year. But anyway, be that as it may. In Parshat Vayishlach, they decide to send out spies to check out the land of Israel, which makes perfect sense. Why not? And the commentaries have a lot of discussion on that because it ends up being a very poor choice of what to do. Because they search out the land. It's very nice, good place to live, but the people there are too strong for us. We can't conquer it. So they've lost faith already once again. So 10 of the 12 spies make that observation. And 2, Joshua and Caleb try to say, no, we can do it. But because there's a lack of faith, a loss of faith in God, it's decreed that just like it took them 40 days to search out through the land of Canaan, they will spend 40 years in the Midbar, in the wilderness, and so that everyone from the age of 20 and onward will have died before they enter into the land of Israel. 20 was really the military age, and that was, I guess, in a sense, in biblical era, true adulthood. And so all of the adults had to leave the scene before they were allowed to enter the land of Israel. So that's where the book of Joshua takes over at that point. We also have the very famous story of Bilam. Bilam is a prophet of the nations, spelled in English, I never understood it, B-A-L-A-A-M, Balaam. And he's told to curse Israel. And he says, I can't curse Israel unless God tells me to. And eventually he gives in and says, all right, I'll go and do it, even though God has first told him don't. Then God says the second night, when they send a second group of emissaries from Balak to get him to come and curse Israel. And so God appears to him in a dream again. And he says, what's going on? Not like, that's not the words he used, but anyway, why are they here? And he says, they've asked to, been sent for me to come and curse Israel. God says, if you want to go along. It's like, if you're a parent, you sometimes say to your kids, if you want to do it. But you know that your parent doesn't want you really to do it, but you choose to listen to their words and not their tone. So he sets out to go in, and then that's the famous episode where he's riding on his favorite donkey, his ass, and there's an angel stands in the road and blocks the way, and eventually, after he beats on her, she says, what are you beating me for? And the angel says to Bilam, I'm here, and if it hadn't been for your ass, I would have killed you. And famously, Maimonides, the rationalist, refer to him, in order to eliminate as much as possible the non-normative things in the Torah, says it's all a dream. That the story of Bilam and his talking donkey is a dream. The rabbis of old apparently did not see it that way. It's clear from some of the comments and elsewhere. They believed it really happened. That doesn't matter. Bilam goes on, tries to curse Israel every time God intervenes and tells them not to curse Israel. One of the famous lines that he ends up using is "Matovo alecha Yaakov mishkanotecha Yisrael." How goodly are tents, O Jacob, your dwelling places, O Israel, which is the words that we are supposed to recite when we enter into the synagogue today. We at the end of Bamidbar, we're about ready to enter into the land of Israel, introducing to the book of Deuteronomy, which is basically made up of Moses's farewell speeches. All right, so that's Bamidbar. Last week we talked about the various movements in Jewish people. I think I was in a strange mood last week. Very negative mood, I think, and so it may have come across, which I apologize. But so I want to make sure that certain elements came across. First of all, we have to understand that the first of the movements, as a movement, is understanding themselves as a religious movement, was the Reform movement. They organized as understanding that they were a grouping in the United States, North America. Hebrew Union College in Cincinnati was their major rabbinical school. CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, is the rabbinic group of the Reform movement. Their synagogue grouping is, oh, come on. Not American Hebrew Congregations, but I forget, I'll send it out I'll see my notes when I remember it exactly. Those are the major, and what's equally important to understand is that the Reform movement stresses the idea of ethical monotheism. That's the supreme value expressed in terms of Reform, and that is part and parcel why in the Reform movement is generally a very liberal political action kind of understanding of where you have to operate in the world. Doesn't mean those things don't exist in other movements, but that is important in the Reform movement. Also, the way they study the Bible is the critical approach, right? Which we talked about a long time ago. They accept biblical criticism as part and parcel of the approach towards understanding the Bible. Orthodoxy takes a shape as a reaction to the Reform. In other words, as a conscious movement. In Germany, Samson Raphael Hirsch is given the credit, kind of creating that. In North America, the Yeshiva University and its rabbinical school, Rabbi Isaac Elchanan Theological Seminary, is the major school for the Orthodox, modern Orthodox in North America. Union of Orthodox Congregations is their congregational body, and the Rabbinical Council of America, not to be confused with the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, doesn't exist anymore, does it?
Don't think
I don't think so. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Anyway, that's their major group. But within the Orthodox world, I'm kind of reviewing the major highlights in case you don't know what's going in the test. I was listening to an interesting lecture. I'm always learning. You should always be learning. And so the particular spokesman was suggesting when you look at the Orthodox world today, you really need to think of modern Orthodox as a grouping, which would be that they accept the idea that living in the modern world is important, being part of the world around you is important, that secular education is important, not necessarily saying superior to Torah education, but it's important, there's a value to it. For example, one of the wonderful exemplars of this, Rabbi Aaron Lichtenstein of blessed memory, had a PhD in English. And when he gave Talmud Shiurim, Talmud lessons, he could also sometimes be quoting Shakespeare or Milton or other great poets and writers of English literature. And he saw it as a positive value. Right? And the major figure at Yeshiva University in the late 20th century was Yosef Ber Soloveitchik, who also had a PhD in philosophy and wrote about philosophy in Kierkegaard and all the moderns. Right? So that's the modern Orthodox world. Then you have two other groupings that are sometimes broadly painted as Haredim. You have Hasidim, and you have what are the yeshiva world. Yeshivish is sometimes referred to. Hasidim follow the Hasidic traditions. Generally speaking, they will wear other garb. At least many within the Hasidic world will wear garb that's very clearly distinctive from the garb of the outside world. They're very strict in terms of dress in general. Paralleling that is what the yeshiva world, especially Lithuanian Jewry, which centers around the yeshiva world, and yeshiva and learning Torah is the center of their life. That doesn't mean that both of them don't necessarily get some secular education, but secular education is generally viewed as only a necessity for earning a living. It's not generally viewed as something that has positive value in and of itself, versus modern Orthodox that have a tendency to accept that there's a positive value to it. Not superior to Torah values, but a value nonetheless. And they've had to rely on Maimonides, studied secular works. He was a doctor, he was a philosopher, so certainly have that to rely upon. All right, and they have their own yeshivot, their own schools. The yeshivish world would be, what you tend to call the black hats. All right, and their garb is not necessarily different from everybody else. It's just that the men have a tendency to wear black hats, and in the synagogue worship, what have you, sometimes. And they are more the Hasidim tend to be very insular. The yeshivish crowd, not necessarily as much. And there's always overlap. It's, you can't judge everyone. My father-in-law, blessed memory, is from Minneapolis. And he and his wife lived there. My wife was born in Minneapolis. And he eventually, without going through the long story, became part of a community that would be classified as a yeshivish community. There were a lot who were not, but amongst those were people who went fishing. My father-in-law went on fishing trips with him, and Yankee Roberts was one of them. And he was at one time of his life, he was a shochet. He went out to slaughter cattle, and you'd go out into you didn't do it downtown Minneapolis. It was out somewhere. And he was driving back one time, and he was an avid fisherman. He was driving by near a farm that had this pond. So he decided to go fishing. He saw the farmer, and it was okay for him to go fishing there. He says, by the way, if you get any phone calls, tell him that Dr. Roberts is out here fishing. Okay, not that he was a doctor. Anyway, that was Yankee's sense of humor. All right. Totally reject, except from very small, minor areas, biblical criticism. The Torah is the word of God, dictated by God to Moses at Sinai. We have no power, rights whatsoever to change or alter any law of the Torah, and even rabbinic law in general. There is no room for moving away from what has become the accepted position of the majority of what they would say is the religious world. Okay? So, for example, you will hear I'm saying that they follow the Shulchan Aruch, right? That's the guidebook. Although the fact of the matter is, nobody follows the Shulchan Aruch 100% because their commentaries are different, what have you, and so that really wasn't the last word. But that, you know, is a shorthand way of saying it, and generally reject any attempt to make history an element in understanding the development of Judaism. In the more modern part of the world, they play with that a little bit, but it's a very touchy area, because once you start talking about putting in a historical context, you run into issues. I'll give you one important one. Many years ago, there was an attempt by some Orthodox rabbinic figures to say, the Talmud says, I can't remember how to quote it exactly. It's a great quotation, Tum Danda, something, that a woman would rather be married than be on her own. Okay, so you assume that anything that would move a woman from being married, she would. It's just not the right thing to do unless absolutely necessary. Okay, so. If we look at it historically, we see that was because, 500,000 years ago, even 500 years ago, a woman on her own was financially in a difficult situation. So yeah, she might be rather be married in a bad marriage than be divorced and out on her own. Okay, that is not the case today. Clearly, that is not the case in the modern world, where women earn a living, they can be on their own, they can and have just as much protection, single or married, whatever the case may be. Sometimes they out-earn their husbands, whatever, in such a way. So should that have impact on the halacha, the law? And Rav Soloveitchik, I mentioned a minute ago about, modern philosophy and all of that, he came down with a iron fist on the rabbi who was suggesting that we could reject that idea. He says that's the conservative approach, using history. Okay. The third movement, which also really was a response to reform, was that of what eventually became known as the conservative movement. In Germany, it was the School of Historical Judaism, movement for historical Judaism. The major center is Jewish Logical Seminary in America. The rabbinic group is a Rabbinical Assembly, and the conservative synagogue movement is United Synagogue. And while it began its life close to the Orthodox world, had the earliest, many of the early students that came to JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, came from Orthodox backgrounds. We know, if you remember last week, it came into being in part because of the famous Treifa banquet at HUC. And up until the 50s, it was rather moderate in changes that allowed to take place, at least as on an official level. Most conservative synagogues did not have a mechitza. Men and women sat together. There were some that had musical accompaniment on Shabbat, others did not. But under the basic rubric that men are expected to wear a kippah, or talis, kashrut was to be observed. The synagogue was observed the Shabbat very traditionally. In the 50s, the first real major break came when the tshuva allowing driving to the synagogue on Shabbat, to and from the synagogue only. That's what the original tshuva was. With the 60s and the 70s and up to the beginning of this current century, the 21st century, much more liberal in a practice. On an official level, women were ordained as rabbis. People who were gay were also ordained at the seminary. But certain elements make it clearly more traditional, at least on official level. Today's Yom Tov. Rabbis cannot perform intermarriages. The role of halacha is a hazy one, depending upon whom you're speaking with. It's become much more liberal in the last number of years. Instead of being the largest synagogue body, it is now second to the Reform. It also accepts biblical criticism. That's the way Bible is taught at the seminary and most of its institutions. There are other institutions, but essentially the JTS is the major one for the conservative. Then we also have various other streams that are around today in modern movements that owe their existence really to all the upheavals and everything in the late 60s, early 70s, and have various, do not consider themselves bound by Jewish law. They like Jewish practices, neo-Hasidism, with the idea, the emphasis on spirituality and on music and dance and expression in that way is a big part of some of those synagogues. Some are organized under the Alpha movement, and there are other kinds of things out there. All right, that's just a broad brush. But I think that's, gives you the idea. Those are the major elements, principles you should remember. Okay. And the last one, of course, the very famous definition of the difference between a fanatic and a heretic. A heretic is anybody who doesn't believe like I do and does less than I do. And a fanatic is anybody who does more than I do. Okay. All right. This is, of course, the last regular class tonight. We're off next week for Shavuot. Hope all of you will find a synagogue. They're having study sessions, either all night, part of the night, what have you, next week. Well, Tuesday night is when that takes place. And the final class, we will have the exam. I really want everybody here for the exam. In order to do that, I'm not going to be Zooming the class. Okay, we will meet here, God willing. I assume in the regular boardroom, but we will see. All right. And I will send out the test in advance, but you must bring it with you to the class, so we can go over it. And I will probably, so I'm thinking of supplying you with all of the exam questions that we've had, so that you can review that over the course of time. It is your responsibility to contact your sponsoring rabbi to deal with the final stages. If you choose to go before the Beit Din, your sponsoring rabbi is the one who will make those arrangements. Okay? I was just at this morning, I was part of a Beit Din. All right, so it's going on now. They have drained and cleaned the mikveh for the summer. Usually the summer cleaning has taken place, so it's all back in service now, and the water is still comfortably warm. Okay. So what we're going to talk about tonight really are the minor holidays that have not been touched upon, and the major and the fast days. The most important fast day of the summer is Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. According to the biblical account, and though there are some issues in rabbinic understandings as well, but the 9th of Av is accepted as the time that the first temple was destroyed. In 586 BCE, the Babylonians under Nebuchadnezzar, their king, their emperor, put down the final Jewish revolt. It was a series of events. It was not the first conquest. Judah had already been conquered, but as a result of rebellions against their rule, and the temple is destroyed. And that was a cataclysm for the Judaism that existed at that time, just as it was a cataclysm when the Second Temple is destroyed in the year 70. Even more so in some ways. If you look at modern historians, their vision of the biblical world, they will argue whether or not Judaism at that time was truly monotheistic, or does it really just said there's one God that is our God, and the other gods have meaning to other peoples. They're not our gods. We don't worry about them, but don't necessarily deny their existence. But God is worshipped here in the land of Israel, in the temple in Jerusalem, his holy house, where God was present. We no longer have that place. That temple is gone. What are we to do? So with not only the various exiles that took place prior to that moment and after that moment of the leadership of Judah, the destruction of the core, the central place of worship, was impactful. And if you remember when we spoke about Jeremiah, the prophet Jeremiah, he insisted that the temple could be destroyed against those prophets who said, no, the temple cannot be destroyed. And his message was, the temple's important, but if you don't follow the ways of God, which means not just ritual ideas, but social, moral principles, just the fact that it's God's house doesn't guarantee its existence, and so it's destroyed. The result we have in biblical literature, Jeremiah's laments in the book of Jeremiah and the book of Lamentations. Right? And the way the observance of Tisha B'Av, it is one of the two 24 and really 25-hour fasts on the Jewish calendar. The other being what?
Yom Kippur.
Yom Kippur. All other fasts in our calendar are sunrise to after sunset, or actually from dawn to after sunset. And really the observance for Tisha B'Av, we'll come back to that in a minute. All right, so the Second Temple in the year 70 is destroyed by the Romans, and may actually have been destroyed a day or two later. Again, it doesn't really matter. They're placed together. And indeed, in Jewish history, the 9th of Av is seen as a very unfortunate time. You don't, if you want to have a court case with somebody who's not Jewish, don't do it in the month of Av. Okay, you won't be successful. That's, this kind of bad luck surrounding it. So the impact again was extremely cataclysmic. This time we see that Judaism, as we know it today, really historically begins to take its real shape following the destruction of the temple, because you need something to replace it. And while there are customs and traditions and observances that we have that predate the destruction of the Second Temple, certainly the form that Judaism really takes and begins to develop post-dates the temple in the impact and formation that we have it as today. Okay? It also, interestingly enough, it in some ways serves as a division between Judaism and early Christianity. Because the early church, the Jewish element of the church, was in Jerusalem. And with the destruction of Jerusalem, they left there, and some saw the destruction of the temple as punishment for those Jews who didn't accept Jesus. And so that helped to make that divide. Right? But so now the idea of prayer replacing sacrifices, other rituals that were meant to sort of imitate what took place in the temple in everyday life becomes the way we express ourselves Jewishly. So a number of fast days in the calendar all surround the destruction of the temple. But so Tisha B'Av is the most serious of them. The 10th of Tevet, which is after Hanukkah, that's in the early winter, the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem, is noted. You have the 17th of Tammuz. That's in the middle of the summer. All right, so we're drawing up. We're going to have Shavuot. After Sivan is Tammuz, and the 17th of Tammuz, which according to is when we begin preparing, as it were, for Tisha B'Av. So it's a half fast from sunrise, before sunrise to after sunset, traditionally observed. Special Torah reading, and just not consumption of food, but that's it. But the 3 weeks between the 17th of Tammuz leading up to Tisha B'Av were considered to be times of ill luck. Traditionally, weddings were not performed during those 3 weeks. That's why rabbis go on vacation during those 3 weeks, in some circles anyway. Various customs, just like haircutting traditionally in traditional circles, the overtime from Pesach to Shavuot, different customs about how you observe that exactly, but the idea of shaving and cutting your hair, which are all symbolic of mourning, are restricted from the 17th of Tammuz to Tisha B'Av. In Ashkenazic circles, beginning with Rosh Chodesh Av, one tradition refrains from eating meat and drinking wine, except for Shabbat. Okay? Those are both symbols of joy. As it says in the Talmud, there's no joy, true joy, without meat and wine. So in Ashkenazic circles, from Tisha B'Av till the 9th of Av, wine is not drunk except for Shabbat. Even Saturday night, the end of Shabbat, some other kind of beverage is used to make Havdalah over. Some communities, especially at camp, because summer camps, that's a big part of the summer, will have somebody finish a tractate of the Talmud so they can have a siyum of celebration of celebrating a tractate of the Talmud. And when you have a siyum, you can have meat. And so they will do that during the 9 days. So besides Shabbat, you can have some meat. That's very popular in camp. And Masechet Makot, which is one of the shortest tractates of the Talmud, is learned in many places over the summer at that time. So now Tisha B'Av has the same kind of restrictions of Yom Kippur. We don't eat or drink. We don't bathe. We don't anoint ourselves. Conjugal relations are forbidden. Leather shoes are traditionally not worn. Also, interestingly enough, the study of Torah is not supposed to take place because Torah study is a joy. To learn Torah is a joy. It's a happiness. And so the tradition is that we do not learn on the normal way, except for those passages in the Talmud or that talk about the destruction, or talk about the laws of mourning, or the Midrash that talks about it, or passages in Jeremiah that talk about it, or the book of Job, which is all about the sorrows of Job. Those elements are studied, but perhaps, but not the others. Today's world, it also, Tisha B'Av in many circles, it becomes a way of also remembering the Holocaust. A number of events throughout history have transpired around the 9th of Av, and so are associated with the 9th of Av. And sometimes that was purposely. The expulsion from Spain in 1492 was on the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. It was not by accident. That was the church's way of kind of giving the knife in the heart twist. So we do have Yom HaShoah that is observed. Now, the interesting thing about Yom HaShoah, which we observe a little bit after Pesach, is the date was chosen by the Israeli Knesset. And really, it's Yom HaShoah v'Hagevurah, destruction and courage or strength. And the date was picked so that you could commemorate the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, which took place on Pesach. In order to satisfy everybody, it was determined to have Yom HaShoah be commemorated after Pesach was over. So we didn't run into any issues with that. But in the more Haredi world, since this was done by a secular legislature, which has no weight in the Haredi world, and they do not choose to observe Yom HaShoah. Rather, they observe the commemoration on Tisha B'Av. How do we observe it besides the fasting and all? At night, we read the Book of Lamentation, Eicha. It's chanted at a very mournful kind of melodic device. Eicha yashva badai, yadai dai 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 dai, yadai dai 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 dai. Right? So we read the 5 chapters of Eicha, which laments the destruction of the temple. It begins on how Jerusalem is now abandoned, all alone, destroyed. And those that she thought were her friends are taking place in her destruction. And in the liturgy, we have prayers that make reference to the destruction. One of the, all right, so that's Tisha B'Av night. In the morning, we don't recite Lamentations, at least traditionally it was not, though some synagogues today repeat it in the morning. But after the morning service, which is also chanted in an undertone, in synagogues where people wear tefillin, talis and tefillin, those who wear talis and tefillin don't wear it traditionally in the morning of Tisha B'Av, because it's considered to be a beautification, an ornament. So instead, we wait until mincha time in the afternoon to put on the talit and tefillin. And then there is what are called lamentations that are recited. Keynote, which were written over the course of the centuries. Some of them are written by the poets who are responsible for some of the liturgical poetry of the high holidays. But some come from different periods in Jewish history. Some refer to the destruction of the first temple. Some refer to the destruction of the second temple. Some refer to various events in Jewish history. There's one that talks about the massacres at York that took place at York, not here, although maybe we need to write a new one, but York in England. And there have been some compositions referring to the Holocaust that are recited in some synagogues. You can spend all day chanting the keynote. Most synagogues will finish it by afternoon. And various synagogues have different kinds of programs and things to concentrate on some kind of commemoration of the day. A lot of Holocaust commemorations take place in the Orthodox synagogues in the afternoons and things like that. Okay, so since Tisha B'Av itself is a mournful day, while we conclude the fast after sunset, the tradition is not to eat meat until the next night, traditionally. Right? And that is, is sometimes referred to in some sources as the black fast, while Yom Kippur is referred to as the white fast. Another relatively minor observance is Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av. Very strange. We have a statement in the Mishnah that says there's no greater day of joy than the Tu B'Av and Yom Kippur in the Jewish communities, because on both of those dates, the unattached girls borrowed white dresses from their neighbors and would go and dance outside in the hills and would sing, and the young guys would come and look. And there are various discussions of what they said. It's not really Sadie Hawkins Day, for those who've ever heard that statement, but it's sort of seen like the Jewish version thereof, as it were. And so it's a joyous day, which kind of needs something. Just like the August holiday, they had to come up with a holiday in August. So Tu B'Av, and it's still when the Catskills was a big center of Jewish summer life. They had a lot of Jewish hotels, kosher ones, not kosher ones, and they still have, I think, they have a Tu B'Av weekend, which is usually big singles weekends for single Jews who come out to the Catskills to see what's out there. So I mentioned Yom HaShoah, leading up to Yom Ha'atzmaut. The day before Yom Ha'atzmaut is Yom Zikaron, Memorial Day for those who died in Israel's wars, which unfortunately is being augmented this year, which always precedes the celebration of Israel's independence. Because of the desire to make sure as much of the Jewish community can participate, the 5th of Iyar is a date for it, but it won't fall. They kick it around, so it doesn't fall on Saturday night or Friday night because of Yom HaShoah commemorations and everything. So it's been moved a little bit over, which is okay to commemorate Israel's independence. Depending upon the synagogue, it's celebrated. Well, Yom Zikaron is lesser commemorated. It's really much more an Israeli Jewish commemoration, but it is commemorated in many synagogues. And Yom Ha'atzmaut, Israel Independence Day, is commemorated in almost all synagogues, at least on the date or on Shabbat near it, with various means of celebrating and noting it. Okay. So we have, and the only other fast day, I think, the other two fast days, just as a reminder, the day after Yom Kippur, Tzom Gedalia, which commemorates the murder of Gedaliah at the hands of Jews. Gedaliah was the appointed governor of Judah after the destruction of the first temple, and Jewish hotheads didn't like him being around, and so they killed him. And of course, the fast of Esther, which we commemorate the day before Purim under normal circumstances. Okay, are there any questions about what we covered this term?
For me are no topics, no word, no expressions. I was not aware of these holidays. Tu B'Av.
15th of Av, Tet Vav Av.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm not sure when it became actually Tu B'Av. At a certain point in Jewish history, the letter, the numeral system before the adoption of the Arab numerals was use the letters. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Yud is 10, 11 would be with Yud plus 1, Yud Aleph, Yud Bet, Yud Gimel, Yud Daled. Well, the next one would be Yud Hey, but Yud Hey is also the name of God. In the medieval period, they didn't seem to care, at least, and Yud Vav is also. And we will find from time to time those numerations, but at some point in time, it became no longer acceptable. So instead of Yud Hey for 15, it's Tet Vav, 9 and 6. All right, and 9 and 7, Taz, for that. So Tu B'Av is why it's just like Tu B'Shvat. All right, the 15th of Shvat. It should be Yud Hey Shvat, but it becomes Tu B'Shvat. All right, and we had Lag Bomer just a couple of weeks ago.
What is the?
Tu B'Shvat,
plants?
yeah, the trees. It has its origins in the statement in the Talmud Mishnah. Actually, it says that there are 4 Rosh Hashanahs in the year. There are 4 calendar years, really. And one of them is, according to the school of Shammai, the 1st of Shvat. According to the school of Hillel, it's the 15th of Shvat. If a tree blossoms before then that's last year's fruits. If they start to bud, the fruits. If it comes after, it's this year's fruits. So it's, in a sense, it's a tax day. You know, it's like April 30th, right? Indian or not. Well, no, I guess you have to say December 31st. Any income up to the 31st is last year's income. Any income the next day is the next year's income. So any buds that come on the tree, the 14th of Shvat is last year's tithing, and after the 15th of the 15th later is next year's tithing. That's what it really is. But it becomes then a general celebration, especially in Israel today. The Jewish Arbor Day. I'm not sure how many people know about Arbor Day today. Holiday for trees.
I took my previous schooler because there was a service at the synagogue. We taste of exotic fruits. For us, it's like, it tastes so good and so.
Yeah. All right. I just want to throw one interesting little thing out there. These are the pretty much the Jewish holidays on the map. We know that certain people, certain families have their own special celebrations. For example, when I was a student at Yeshiva University, some of my classmates, their father worked for the ADL. And ADL or B'nai Brit, I forget which one it was. And there was this episode in which there was an attack on a building in New York where the headquarters were. I don't remember the details, but their father he escaped without any harm. So they celebrate every year on that date a kind of Purim for them. Jewish tradition really didn't celebrate birthdays. Birthdays were not a big thing in Jewish traditions until the modern era. The only time birthdays were really important was the date of bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, when you become subject to the mitzvot. But annual birthday celebrations really was not part and parcel of the Jewish celebrating calendar. And every Shabbat is really kind of a holiday too, as well. It should be. Okay. All right. Enjoy Shavuot. I will send out the test, but you must show up here to turn it into me in person. Unless you have 2 broken legs and no way of getting here, or you make very special arrangements with me because some issue, you must be present for that final exam, okay? Yeah, everybody gets out early tonight. Go home, go celebrate. I don't know what's on TV, but
Well, hockey starts tomorrow.
hockey's tomorrow.
No, it's basketball.
I don't know. I grew up in Jacksonville, Florida. Football, maybe baseball, but
That's it.
this hockey stuff. That's for you Yankees.
Huh?
I don't know.
Blue Jays aren't winning.
No.
No. Yeah, sure. What can you do? All right.
Well, maybe I'll sign up.